Welcome to Douglas Weekly, Episode 1, The Soviet Union of America. In this podcast, we'll chat about two superpowers of the late 20th century, Soviet Union and United States of America. Sadly, no, this will not be an entertaining and plausible conspiracy rant about communists being secretly in control of the US, however entertaining that might be. Rather, I want to discuss how we perceive the United States and the Soviet Union, at least from the perspective of a person in a Western industrialized country at the beginning of the 21st century. To give a brief overview of the history, both the United States and Soviet Union emerged from World War II with very large militaries, influence, and control of large territories. Both took advantage to become hegemonic powers and set up international orders, US building its international order based on a capitalist system, the Soviet Union based on a communist system. The relations between the two countries were historically antagonistic, as both officially reviled each other's system. For much of the 20th century, these two superpowers engaged in a Cold War, avoiding direct confrontation but competing through proxy wars and arms races with nuclear weapons and other means. In 1991, after a series of radical reforms by Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union collapsed, breaking into 15 different countries. Russia, the main part of the Soviet Union, lost much of its stature and influence in the world. The United States continues to exist and maintain many of its Cold War institutions, such as NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a mutual defense agreement for countries in North America and Europe. At that time, because of the intense rivalry, in the West, the traditional allies of the United States generally believed that the collapse of the Soviet Union and the current status of the United States at that time were a testament to the superiority of the United States and its capitalist ideology. Maybe Francis Fukuyama encapsulated this triumphant argument the best with his argument about how the Cold War was the end of history. Here's what he said. What we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is, the endpoint of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of liberal democracy as the final form of government. Basically, the United States and this liberal democratic order were the final evolution in humans' government. In hindsight, with the rise of non-democratic China, continuing religious fundamentalism, and with increased disenchantment of capitalism and a shrinking middle class in the West, this may have been a slight premature statement. The podcaster Dan Carlin mentioned the idea of historical compression, that after a certain amount of time passes on a historical era, people develop a more distant perspective of history. They start to see the larger picture, see it from a 10,000 feet perspective. But that's really difficult when you're living just in or after the event. When your face is smushed up against the tree, like Francis Fukuyama, it's hard to see the forest, especially when that forest hasn't even finished growing. What is the long-term future of the US? It's not very clear. Every political order eventually comes to an end. But when will the US's political order end? 500 years? 100 years? 20 years? Currently, the US has some very impressive qualities. The largest, richest economy in the world, unrivaled military power. But it also has some very serious challenges, including a very polarized society, a political system so influenced by money, it's really plutocratic, basically ruled by the rich, rather than democratic and ruled by the people, and a political system, media system, and set of elites that are increasingly losing credibility with their population. These are serious problems that undermine a system. Just look at the past Soviet Union. So hypothetically, what if the US political world order, neoliberal globalization, collapsed in the near future? It's only been 25 years since the Soviet Union collapsed, and that's not a historically long time. It's not even a breath in the life of human history. In the future, when our history is compressed, it will look like the Soviet Union just collapsed. history would probably not regard the Soviet Union collapse as an indication of US superiority. Rather, they would see two superpowers collapsing around the same time. Rather than see it as two completely separate countries whose ideology completely decided their success and failure, maybe they would see commonalities between the two superpowers. What would be some commonalities? I first thought about this after 9/11, when the US government and other Western democracies began to institute increased surveillance, advocate for suspension of civil liberties, and other non-democratic measures. At the time, I joked, if we were going to abandon our democratic values now, maybe we should have just given up during the Cold War and joined the Russians. What's the point if you're going to throw away democracy later anyways? This came back to me again when I recently read about the incarceration epidemic in the US, how per capita it has the most prisons by far. That is kind of strange for a democratic country. So in future podcasts, I want to discuss possible commonalities. Now, this is not to say that common issues will have an identical scope and context in the US and Soviet Union cases. For instance, the current US incarceration issue is not identical to the Gulag prisons of Stalin, but both have serious challenges, and I'm guessing there is some commonality. In future podcasts, I look forward to looking at these commonalities. Till next time, see you later.